So you attempt to log into your computer and you see this message. Your computer has been infected. You have 2 days to pay up with a certain amount of Bitcoin. Otherwise, you will not get access to your computer systems again. What you saw there is a ransomware attack. Hi, I'm Femi OK. You're watching the stream. On today's episode, we are looking at the growing number of high-profile ransomware attacks and what can be done to stop them. Cybersecurity experts lining up to be on the stream. Hello, Katie. Hello, Bryce. Hello, MK. So good to see you. Katie, introduce yourself to our stream audience. Tell them who you are and what you do.
Yes, thanks so much for having me, Femi. I'm Katie Nichols. I'm the Director of Intelligence at cybersecurity company Red Canary. I'm also an instructor for the SANS Institute, as well as a fellow for the Atlantic Council. So really happy to be here today.
Happy to have you. Hello, Bryce. Nice to have you on the stream. Introduce yourself to our global audience.
Hi, thank you for having me. My name is Bryce Webster Jacobson. I'm the Director of Intelligence Operations at GroupSense.
And MK, introduce yourself to our stream audience.
Hey, you bet, Femi. Thanks for having me on. MK Palmore, Field Chief Security Officer for the Americas for Palo Alto Networks, and also a retired FBI Special Agent.
Good to have you. So I know you're going to have questions. If you're watching on YouTube, you can put your questions, your comments, your concerns to our cybersecurity experts. Jump into the comment section and be part of today's show. Let me start with Katie and guess this is a question for all of you. I really want to understand what actually is a ransomware attack. They take many forms. Katie, you start.
Yeah, I think what you brought up at the beginning of the show is a great example. And there's this message. And a ransomware attack is when an adversary logs into a network, they gain illegitimate access, and they basically say, unless you pay us, you can't get your files back. That's a traditional ransomware attack. But what we've seen is these adversaries are changing things up a little bit. And so, for example, increasingly in the past few months and year or so, we've seen that adversaries aren't just encrypting files, right, making them unavailable. They're also stealing them and saying, unless your company pays us, we're going to leak these files to the internet. So those are two key types of ransomware attacks. But as you said, it's sort of a complex space.
MK, at some point you were leading a cybersecurity for San Francisco FBI, so you know all about ransomware attacks and the early days of ransomware attacks as well. Who is doing this?
Yeah, you bet. So the prevalence of ransomware attacks comes both from individuals who are engaged in delivering this kind of malicious script onto computer systems, but also groups that have banded together and are using their skills, assets, and resources to target industries and individuals. Because frankly, what we've seen in terms of ransomware attacks is a vibrant business model that quite frankly works for the adversary. These folks make a ton of money off of these engagements.
I'm just looking, Bryce, at some of the stories that we've been able to find around the world. Here on my laptop, 2 Kent schools close after ransomware attack. Cyber attack leads to computer system failure at Humber River Hospital, impacting patient care. That is terrifying. California City computer system down for weeks in ransomware attack. There are so many more. I could keep going on and on. What are the attacks that you've seen that really stand out to you?
Yeah, so at GroupSense, we've seen attacks across industries, across size of companies. We see everything from organizations that are nonprofits working on cancer research to large Fortune 100 companies that have been totally shut down by a ransomware incident. The ones that really stand out to me are the calls that we get from small business owners that they're facing a potentially business-ending event when they log onto their computers and see that ransom note that you showed at the beginning of the show.
Yeah, Bryce, I would jump in here and add, I see schools and hospitals are often highlighted, and we read about those in the news. Those are the ones that make me really, really angry. There was one compromise in particular in the fall that I remember very well, because my team was a Friday in late October, and we saw the start of a suspected ransomware attack on a hospital. What a lot of people don't realize is that these attacks have different phases. Have to get in the network somehow, they move around. And so my team was really fortunate. We were able to see the adversaries kind of getting in and starting to move and actually jump in, communicate with the hospital, and stop that before it got to the bad part. And that's an example of something that went well. But as you've shown, hospitals and schools, that's what really makes me a little bit angry.
And what Katie just, I was just going to say, what she just outlined is one of the things I think that we oftentimes forget in security practice, which is that cyberkill chain, which is the number of steps and processes that the adversary goes through in order to successfully engage in their attack. As practitioners and as business enterprises begin to pay much more attention at this, it's still relevant to understand that from a prevention standpoint, if you can interdict activity within the cyber kill chain, ultimately you can prevent these attacks from happening.
I want to give people an idea of how big the issue is. MK, you were really helpful for us because you provided some stats so we could look at them. It's hard to even get details because maybe not everybody reports what if a ransomware attack has happened. Should they not? I want to ask you that in just a moment. But let's just look at the average ransom paid triple from 2019 to 2020, and then the highest known paid ransom. Now, these figures come from Palo Alto, so this is MK's company. You may, Bryce, and also Katie, you may have seen more than this, but so far this year, and we're only in June, $50 million. Bryce, have you seen higher?
I have personally not seen higher. 50 million is the highest that I've seen, and I commend their work on that settlement.
Katie?
Yeah, I haven't personally either, but one thing I'd point out about these numbers alluded to is the scope of this problem. And that's something that, we're asking each other a lot, and reporters are asking, and the common average person who first heard of ransomware is asking, is this a new problem? Well, no, it isn't. It's just that we're getting more attention on it, right? But it's really tough to know, is ransomware getting worse? I think it is, but how much worse is it than maybe 1 month ago or 6 months ago? And part of what's so tough is that no one sees everything. Each of us have our own visibility, governments around the world, different organizations. Not everyone, for good reason, wants to report that they were a victim. And so that's part of the challenge of this ecosystem is, I think, those numbers might only scrape the surface of what's really happening out there.
MK, who paid $50 million, MK?
Yeah, so before we get to that, I think it's important to put these numbers into context. I can recall probably 5 years ago, the first instance of ransomware being brought to my attention as an executive in the FBI. What we've seen, although the tactic and technique has been around for decades, let's be clear on that in terms of the ability of these adversaries to accomplish what it is that they're seeking. But first came to light probably late 2016, 2017, started to get a lot of attention. And those figures that you put up there on the screen from our own Unit 42, which is the Palo Alto Network's threat intelligence team, we've seen year over year an increase not just in the rapidity of attacks, but the amounts for which ransomware adversaries are now asking of their victims once they've encrypted their data. This all started out really tackling or targeting consumers. And as we all know, all of us are consumers. They are probably the least prepared in terms of the preparation of their systems to combat attacks. But then it grew in terms of scale once they realized that they could target large-scale enterprises like the healthcare industry, like the public sector in terms of schools, and even cities, as we've seen historically. And the reason that they continue to build on their business model, quite frankly, is because it works for them, and those figures bear that out.
Right. Bryce, I want you to have a listen to this additional voice that I'm bringing into our conversation from TCE Strategy. We were wondering here on the stream, how big a deal are ransomware attacks? Have a listen, have a look, and then come immediately off the back of the video, Bryce.
Ransomware is simply the single biggest threat that we have to companies today from a cybersecurity standpoint. The profit model for organized crime to commit ransomware attacks is too strong. It's too inexpensive for them to break into your network, and the ransoms that they collect give them a better return on investment than any other type of criminal activity in 2021. The laws against it are not adequately enforced, and they require cooperation of governments around the globe, which is not guaranteed. We need to improve our cyber defenses and our prosecution of these criminals such that the profit model doesn't exist anymore. There simply isn't another way to disincent this type of criminal behavior.
Yeah, I think he, I agree largely with what he was saying. It is a business, and back to what MK was saying, these are organized individuals that really are operating as a business in some cases. This is a really profitable business model. Sometimes the barrier to entry is quite small from a dollar's perspective. We see ransomware kits available for just a few $1,000s or a few $100s on some occasions on the dark web.
A few $100s?
Yeah, and those kits
Why?
allow. Why are they so cheap?
Yeah. If you shut down someone's computer system, at least go for $2,000.
So yeah,
that requires a whole discussion about the ecosystem in the dark web. But
right.
Bryce, go ahead.
Yeah, that's just a week.
Correct,
that's just a week of groceries there. So sorry, Bryce, you surprised me there at how low that the ransomware attack was for. Go ahead. Yeah.
So and you're not the first person that's had the same reaction when we talk about those figures. The dollar amount is often depends on the sophistication of the kit that somebody may be purchasing, or the level of support that they're getting from the organization that has created that tool to conduct ransomware attacks. So there is even a back-end support model among some of these ransomware groups and ransomware organizations, which I think just demonstrates exactly how organized these groups are. Now, I want to return to what the video said that you just shared. I agree that there needs to be more enforcement of laws and effective enforcement of laws. But the one key piece that I think was kind of brushed over there is the partnership that it takes. Often these groups are operating in countries that, frankly, the United States does not have a friendly relationship with, or does not have a successful system or regime to be able to bring these actors to justice. Not even in their home country, and without a doubt in the United States, unless there is some sort of extradition treaty. But so it is really difficult to enforce the legal mechanisms, and I think that's why we need to start as an industry focusing on prevention and preparedness among organizations, individuals, and large-scale companies to prevent future attacks.
We have so many questions
Bryce,
for you,
to
guests.
chime in there.
Yeah, Katie, can I put a question to you, because people want to talk to all of you. Well, they've got the three cybersecurity experts live here on the stream. Okay, so Brent M3, how are security forces unable to obtain decryption tools, unable to advise paying the ransom, unable to track the crypto, and otherwise unable to do anything helpful except tell you to rebuild your data? That's an assumption there, Katie. You start, and I'm definitely going to go to MK to pick up.
Yeah, it seems easy to respond to these attacks until you're in the midst of one. It can be very easy to say, well, just back up your data and, restore from your backed up data and everything will be fine. In reality, first off, most of the encryption that these adversaries use, you simply cannot decrypt it without the key, right? That's a key part of encryption, so to speak. So it's not as simple as just typing in the right thing. Building those systems, right? You're going to have downtime. And even if you do have backups to restore from, that's going to take time. And that's why you see things like, Colonial Pipeline, their network going down, or delays. And so it's not an easy thing. Security professionals do the best we can. But in, going to the comment you made about it's only a couple $100s to get some of these, exploit kits, toolkits. It's cheap for adversaries, and it is tough to respond to.
MK, I want you to pick up here, because Brent M3 absolutely referenced the FBI. It's like, why can't the FBI do this? What have you been able to do during your FBI career as a cybersecurity expert? You were leading a team. You were ahead of many other people. What can you do that you can tell me?
So a couple of the co-speakers have touched on the difficulty that we incur as a society in terms of not just identifying these individuals, but also then bringing them into the justice system. It can be extremely difficult without the existence of pre-existing treaties and diplomatic relations with many of the locations where these adversaries reside. What I did see during my time in the FBI, and again, I've been out of the Bureau now for a little over 2 years, was a growing technical capability by the FBI to do much more decisive and substantive work in the area of not just understanding the blockchain, which is at the core of the digital currency component of it, but also being able to identify adversaries who are responsible for these attacks and subsequently interdicting their activities. And I think case in point, we saw in the Colonial Pipeline instance, and if you go and read the affidavit, which is all that any of us really have outside of intelligence circles, you realize the capabilities of the Bureau and the wider national security agencies to now interdict, be able to obtain private keys, which were up to this point not available, and then subsequently be able to trace digital currency transactions so that they could be in a position to retrieve some of that ransom that was offered in the Colonial Pipeline case. And so the technology capabilities of law enforcement has grown tremendously. I think it will continue to grow. But here's one of the things we got to face as a fact. Technology always precedes the ability of law enforcement and others to really build and be able to deter criminal activity. And so what you see now is the natural evolution of the FBI and other national security agencies really playing catch up to this business model of ransomware.
I've got a quick question for you, Bryce. This comes from YouTube. Mindreader says, are there any options to getting back data without paying any money? You're a negotiator. Has this happened before?
It has happened. There's it really depends on each individual case. So one important aspect that Katie mentioned was backups, and that's a key part of any proactive cybersecurity plan. But we've also seen that backups can be encrypted. So if you have a really effective backup, and that's also been encrypted in the same ransomware attack, then you've now lost that option. Another thing that Katie referenced at the very beginning was this exfiltration of data that then is posted by ransomware groups on their dark web blogs, for lack of a better term. And in those cases, ransom groups are posting the data as a tool to bring the victim back to the negotiating table. There is an option for anybody to go and download that data. So that's one way that a company feasibly could get data back, and we've seen that in some of our experiences. We've also seen organizations who have been able to recover data from their partners. So there are some options, but they're very limited, and it really depends on specific cases. We did have one design firm that worked in the architectural space that was able to recover some of their building plans from public record, and so that was a pretty lucky case for them that was that the majority of the work that they had done had been in the public sphere. But that was a unique case, and that's not an option that's available to every victim.
Okay, so there's a huge dilemma here. If you are hit by a ransomware attack, Katie, just excuse me one moment, because I want to get to this, because we're running out of time. And the question is, should you pay or not pay? Now, all of our guests have mentioned the Colonial Pipeline, and that's a really important pipeline along the eastern side of the US, and that was shut down by a ransomware attack. Colonial Pipeline paid up, and here is the CEO telling the US Senate and the Homeland Security Committee why he paid. Let's have a listen, let's have a look.
I made the decision to pay, and I made the decision to keep the information about the payment as confidential as possible. It was the hardest decision I've made in my 39 years in the energy industry, and I know how critical our pipeline is to the country, and I put the interests of the country first. I kept the information closely held because we were concerned about operational safety and security, and we wanted to stay focused on getting the pipeline back up and running. I believe with all my heart it was the right choice to make.
Katie, right choice?
It's such a tough ethical debate here. My personal opinion is that we should not be outlawing paying ransoms, because I think that it would mess everything up, and it would mess up incentives, because if you forbid people from paying and a business is saying, we might go out of business if we don't pay this ransom, that's a tough thing. And, then they might try to pay and not tell law enforcement about it. So my opinion is it doesn't make sense to outlaw paying ransoms. I can't fault, Colonial Pipeline or anyone else from paying a ransom. When your business is on the line, when people's jobs are on the line, that's a really tough thing. At the same time, it enables criminals to keep doing what they're doing.
Oh, goodness. MK,
So I don't think outlawing ransom.
MK, you have got to be conflicted on this one. Why would you let the criminals get away with it?
Yeah, not really conflicted about it, but I will tell you, I mean, you could hear the pain in Mr. Blunt's voice as he described what was probably for him the toughest business decision he's had to make. And ultimately, that's what it boils down to. This is a business decision that oftentimes enterprises are forced to make in terms of how it is that you get back to some sense of operability, because ultimately, in the instance of healthcare, people's lives can be on the line. In the instance of the pipeline, we're talking about a critical piece of infrastructure being impacted. And so we understand that it is, of course, a business decision. And it's our goal, quite frankly, at Palo Alto Networks to help companies and individuals, quite frankly, invest more in the prevention aspects so they don't find themselves in this position of having to make a decision like whether or not to pay the ransom. Prevention is the key here, and of course, cooperation between public sector and private sector entities in terms of coming up with frameworks that will allow us to really combat this challenge.
I want to bring one more voice into our conversation. This voice comes from Michael Owens. He is the president of the US Global Center for Cyber Policy. Some advice for all of us, and then I'm going to get your takeaways as well. Here's Michael.
Government has not failed us when it comes to cybersecurity, because the fight against cybercriminals and attacks like ransomware are far from over. But now is the time where governments from around the world must truly make cybersecurity a top priority within their administrations. But at the same time, it can't just be left up to government. We as individuals, small businesses, and large corporations all have to ensure that we're doing the things necessary to both mitigate the attacks from happening and also report these attacks when they do happen. Collectively, this is something that we will continue to fight, but by making it a priority on everyone's agenda, we can move forward and make everyone safer.
So guess SPL Puro One is watching right now on YouTube, and they would like to know, how can businesses and others protect themselves from ransomware attacks? I don't want you to give away all of your company secrets, just the most important one. MK, you start.
Yeah, and I already started this with investment in prevention. You know, a couple of days ago or a week ago, the current FBI director indicated that we should be paying attention to ransomware in the same way that we did the 9/11 attacks. And I think, if I can paraphrase for him, what he was talking about is how organizations really need to prioritize their investment in prevention strategies so that they don't find themselves in a bad way. And so understanding what their environments look like, actually taking the time, as Katie and Bryce have mentioned, it's not enough just to have backups. Can you actually fail to those backups? Can you actually restore them? How much time is it going to take in order for you to do that? It's investment in the left-hand side of the equation that will make the difference for organizations, and they can't just be talking about it. They have to be doing it.
Bryce, how do you protect ourselves?
Yeah. Absolutely. I couldn't agree more on the focus on internal prevention and being prepared to proactively respond. What we tend to focus on most is external. We focus on the threats that are external to an organization's networks, which are just as important as the preventative steps that an organization is taking from a cybersecurity perspective. We often see, we referenced earlier kind of the ransomware life cycle or the ransomware attack cycle. And one important component of that is the initial access that can often be sold on the dark web for, again, not a huge sum of money. And so having an organization having the ability to proactively look outside their network
Bryce,
is vital.
Got to share the final 30 seconds with Katie. Katie, what's your takeaway? Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, I think the key is security fundamentals. The boring things that you've been hearing about, updating your software, things like that, making sure you know what you have connected to the internet. That stuff is basic, but it's not easy. And so organizations doing that, but it's going to take more than just cybersecurity professionals. It's going to take policymakers. It's going to take international public-private cooperation to try to put a dent in this ransomware problem.
Have a look here on my website here on my laptop. We have Katie Nichols. Katie, thank you so much. We have Bryce Webster Jacobson. Thank you so much. And MK Palmore. Thank you. And YouTube, thanks for your questions. I will see you next time. Take care.